On the 3rd of July, 1938, Henry Ford received the Grand Cross of the German Eagle personally from Adolf Hitler, only a few weeks before Hitler openly praised Ford for his anti-Semitic views. But why did this happen? Why was Henry Ford so anti-Semitic? And what did President Roosevelt think of his views? Also, what did he have to do with the Italian mafia? Stay tuned, and we will tell you everything about Henry Ford's connections with the Nazis and his dream to build a pure Aryan city in the jungles of South America. Henry Ford was born on July 30th, 1863, in Wayne County, Michigan, to Mary and William Ford. His father had fled Ireland in 1847 during the Great Famine, in which more than 20% of Ireland's population died. His mother, Mary Lydigot Ford, was adopted by neighbors of William Ford when she was an orphan around 1845. They married in 1861 and gave birth to Henry only 2 years later. In his teenage years, Henry lived on a farm, which he very much disliked. He was quoted as saying that chicken meat was inedible and that the consumption of cow's milk should be forbidden because of how gross it was. At 16, he left his home and moved to nearby Detroit, where he worked in a machinist shop as an apprentice. He was known to take apart the machines at his job and put them back together for hours, even after his work ended. At this time, he discovered his passion for motors and machines, but also picked up his first anti-Semitic ideas. At the age of 17, he was introduced to a friend of his co-worker who was a raging anti-Semite and introduced Ford to books like The Greed and 109, which were both extremely racist and spread false stereotypes and ideas that were rapidly gaining popularity in many European countries like Romania and Italy. During the 1890s, Ford worked with Edison Electric, where he drew up plans for his first car and built his first engines, which all either exploded or didn't work. At the end of the 1890s, he managed to make his first fully working engine, which had a whopping speed of 20 miles per hour, which is extremely low for our time. But in the 1800s, this was revolutionary. Finally, in 1903, after about 20 years of working with engines, he made his first working car in his own garage. The only problem was it didn't fit through his garage door, but no problem. He just literally destroyed the sides of his garage door to get his car through. He took it for a spin in the streets of Detroit and finally thought about the thing that would change his life forever. He thought to himself, every car on the market is so expensive, not even the upper class can afford them. I need to make a car that everyone can afford, even the average factory worker. In the same year, he founded the Ford Motor Company, and in 1908, he finally released the car that would revolutionize the car industry forever, the Ford Model T. This car was extremely revolutionary and so cheap that even the working man could afford it. In 1908, the Ford Model T cost $850, which is about $18,000 in today's money. While Ford's Model T only cost $850, his competitors' cars were selling for $3,000 to $6,000, which would be about a range from $95,000 to $180,000 per car. In the following years, his business and anti-Semitism exploded. After he was supposedly scammed by a Jewish business partner, his hate started to burn. This fire started by Ford firing all Jewish workers and not allowing any Jews to work for him. Then in 1920, Henry Ford released a series of booklets named The International Jew, the World's Foremost Problem, which was 120 pages of pure anti-Semitism. From May 22nd to October 2nd, 1920, Ford distributed around 500,000 copies and pushed his business partners to do the same. These books were also a major inspiration to a well-known Austrian painter who adored Ford and his work. We will come back to this monster later. The Ford Motor Company kept releasing these books until 1940, even giving workers a free paid hour of work to read Ford's releases. But it doesn't seem that Ford hated anyone other than Jewish people. His company was one of the first to allow persons of color into manager positions and to fire white workers if they were deemed not ready for the job. This obviously doesn't excuse the horrible stuff he did over the years. Let's cut back to the Austrian painter, also known as Adolf Hitler. Hitler took great inspiration from Ford and even credited him in his book Mein Kampf as a major influential person in his ideas. As we said at the start of the video, Ford was awarded the Grand Cross of the German Eagle, which was the highest award that could be given to a non-German. But Ford's friendship with the Third Reich didn't stop there. The Ford Motor Company supplied over 1,000 cars to Germany that were used to invade Poland, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. President Teddy Roosevelt had to personally get Ford to stop supplying free cars to Germany after Great Britain declared war on the Third Reich. Before the United States got involved in the Second World War, Henry Ford openly supported Hitler and the Nazis, and he worked around the restrictions that didn't allow anyone to supply resources to Nazi Germany by making shell companies in German-occupied Poland that he supplied with resources and machines for the manufacture of cars. But that also ended once the U.S. declared war on the Axis powers, and all production was shifted towards the war effort. At the end of Ford's life, he became increasingly paranoid, at one point even barricading himself in his own house and not letting anyone in for 2 days before his son broke in through a window to calm him down. Henry Ford died on April 7, 1947, at the age of 83 years. In the last years of his life, he fantasized about his own cities where only true American patriots could live. This town was called Fordlandia and was built in the middle of a Brazilian jungle, which obviously doesn't make it ideal. Over 300 buildings were constructed in Fordlandia, most of which are mostly destroyed now. These included 210 houses, a water treatment facility, 20 factories, 2 hospitals, a kindergarten, an elementary school, a high school, and a sort of college, which was never finished. The project stopped just days after Ford's death, but you can still visit it today on a trip that takes 4 days, 2 of which are spent going down a river to reach the Fordlandia port, which is still in decent condition. Just don't spend too long on it, or you might fall into the Fordlandia River. Altogether, Fordlandia was an idiotic idea planned by a paranoid 80-year-old who wanted thousands of American patriots to work in the jungle of Brazil, producing cars that would need to be transported by plane or river, making the transportation cost more than the cars themselves. And who would even want to live in the jungles of Brazil in over 100-degree weather and rain for 300 days of the year? About some of the other stuff he did. Henry Ford deeply despised alcohol and cigarettes, which he credited to the downfall of his father, who in the later years of his life was extremely addicted to alcohol and nicotine. Because of this, Ford didn't want anybody to smoke or drink, and certainly not his workers. As a result, he hired a mobster called Harry Bennett, who was tasked with randomly visiting Ford's workers and searching their houses for any trace of alcohol and cigarettes. If none was found, the worker would get a bonus or a paid hour of work. If something was found, the mob used a 2-strike system. On the first strike, the worker's pay would be lowered, and he would be roughed up by Harry Bennett and his muscle men. On the second strike, the worker was instantly fired. This system was so feared that between 1920 and 1934, when Harry Bennett worked for Ford, only 2 people ever received a third strike, which is crazy to think about since in the early 1900s, almost 95% of the population consumed cigarettes and alcohol heavily. Henry Ford gave up his company to his oldest grandson, Henry Ford II, after his only son, Edsel Ford, died in 1943 due to stomach cancer. Today, the Ford Motor Company is still one of the biggest car producers in the world, only being topped by Volkswagen, Mercedes, and Toyota. Henry Ford's legacy is that of a genius, paranoid man whose bad actions majorly overshadowed his good ones. Somehow, his dark side isn't really talked about, which is why I made this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'd love to see you next time. Also, if you want to hear about any historical figure, please comment so I can take a look into them. Other than that, have a great day. Bye.